there are people who are claiming to have knowledge about what the bad guys were planning on Shmini Atzeres. You remember?
Mm-hmm.
So there are people who showed, like, like they tweeted something on October 4th that says, the timestamp, here are the terrorists planning something. You can see them doing their exercises right across the border into Gaza. And it can't be that they dug all these tunnels, like the Great Escape movies. If you want to dig a tunnel out from a German POW camp, what do you got to get rid of? All the dirt you tunnel out, right? Most of the Shawshank problem. You dig something out, it's got to go somewhere. So when they do excavations here, they build roads. They have those gigantic earth movers, and then the dump trucks. You have dump trucks coming out in a whole caravan dumping these things. So obviously, people would have seen something happening. They would create mounds of this stuff, right? So people knew, and there are other people who claim to have knowledge about these things. It's pretty grounded that there was obviously something happening. My question is, what about the halachas of preemption? Okay, first for the army and for individuals. That means, yeah, just striking. You realize that they're doing something and getting them. Now, this isn't just theoretical. This has actually been a halachic historical issue. The best examples that we know about, let's say, Jewish preemption of the enemy was when? Well, before that.
Oh.
It's called Purim. Okay? What happened? Well, according to what we read in Esther, what was the plan? The bad guys had a royal decree that they were going to allow the Jews to be wiped out. Okay? The shlalom lavos, just kill all the men, women, and children on a certain day. It was supposed to be what day? The 13th of Adar, right? That was the plan. And Achashverosh himself, when he was convinced that, oh yeah, I don't want my favorite wife to be slaughtered, and oh, that's pretty bad for her people. Okay, fine. So I can't retract the order because that's not what I do. So I can just give an order for the Jews to strike first whoever wants to kill them. And it's a good thing too, because when did the decree go out that they could strike back?
Yes, well,
I think it went out in Sivan, right? Okay. Well, where's their cup? In the closet. We could go to the kitchen or to the closet. Everybody should have some drinks. Maybe we should have brought some chips. Maybe someone wants to go back and get the chips. It's been so wild. Yeah, the guy who likes eating the chips isn't here right now. So it says here. It says Sivan. It says Vayikaru Sofrei Melch Ba'itahi B'Chodesh Hashlishi Hu Chodesh Sivan B'Shloshal V'Esrim Bo 23 Sivan. That's 2 months after the original proclamation went out. 2 months and 8 days or so. Well, really 2 months and a few more weeks, because when the proclamation go out right before Pesach, right? That's what's described. So basically, this was a good version of that 1,000 flowers thing we discussed a few weeks ago that the Maoists used. What did they use? The little trick. You know what I'm talking about? Mao said, you know what? We should have a little bit of freedom going on here. We're too restrictive. We're too totalitarian. We don't let people express their ideas and their artisticness. So he just said, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let people actually speak their minds and do what they want to do. Political dissonance and artists and other people like that suddenly came out of the woodwork. And then a year later, once they figured out, okay, these are the type of people who don't like the regime, then they crack down on them and imprison them and kill them. Okay, act nice so that they'll come. So people put their guard down. So that's basically what the Jews got. When the proclamation went out with Achashverosh, the Jews realized, they finally saw the people who suddenly would be like, oh, good, the purge is on. You know what the purge is? Yeah, it's a rhetorical idea. I've never seen a movie, but there's also novels about this. A dystopian society where they declare that there's no law for a certain amount of time, like a day of no law. So if you want to murder your neighbor, go ahead. So everybody has to hunker down that day or be part of the mobs that like to do the killing, right? And by the way, we've actually seen this type of thing unfold. Obviously, this type of thing is forbidden for Bnei Noach, right? Bnei Noach, the first commandment they're given is to have law and order and not to murder and steal. But what would happen if a society told its Bnei Noach, hey, you know what? Go ahead, murder and steal. What's going to happen? It's going to be the entire breakdown of society. Have we seen places like that where it's happened? That's called California. Okay, so you see that it's getting worse. So what we allowed here was that Achashverosh basically said there's going to be a day of the purge for Jews, so you could see who suddenly was celebrating. And by the way, this happens a lot in Jewish history. Suddenly, they the regime allows for killing of the Jews or anti-Semitism. What happens? Suddenly all the anti-Semites, the closeted anti-Semites come out, and suddenly the Jews know who their real enemies are, right? They see them. They don't like to hide this. It happens all the time, right? It happened with the Gaza thing. Oh, a bunch of really heavily armed Amalekites crossed the border and killed Jews, and they were able to get by. So the rest of them, the unarmed ones, the so-called innocent women and children, also came, right? It just shows you what they were thinking all along. So Achashverosh, what he did was create this situation where the Jews knew who were going to get them, and then when the Jews got the chance, they knew who they had to defend from, who they had to kill in order to defend themselves, right? So that's basically what we celebrate on Purim, because the Jews rose up, they knew who they were going to have to fight, they had time to prepare, and they did it. So this would seemingly be, I guess, a biblical proof and a historical proof. It's not a Talmudic proof, but the Talmud assumes that this is what happened, of course, that perhaps preemption of a known enemy is the right thing to do and even worth celebrating, correct? And now you say the Six-Day War example. That was saying that was very clear. How do you know that they were trying to? Because they're actually saying what they're going to do. Now, you could say that, oh, this previous war, there was no open declarations, but that's nonsense. The bad guys have been saying that they're going to try to get us. They keep saying it. That's all they say all day long. And they haven't changed their tune all these years. Just people became attacking us. And shooting rockets, and just people are willfully blind, like those women in the area and the survivors of the kibbutzim. They said, that woman who said, I was the one who drove them to the hospital. They would cross the border. I'd take those workers of mine to the hospital. And the footage showed that there was her voice became a voiceover, and it showed actual footage taken by the perpetrators where they're destroying the ambulance. That's the first thing they did. They got into the kibbutz. What'd they do? Shoot the ambulance. Just immobilize the ambulance that they had used to transport them. They did chesed for them. So my question is, if a Jewish state or army or even individuals had preempted the Shmini Atzeres attacks, would that have been the right thing? You say it's of course. I have an opinion. So I'm not. I would tend to agree with you, although I never seen this in a halacha or anything like that. This isn't.
Well, if you're putting aside the part of the fact that they're terrorists that want to nothing more than to kill us, at the end of the day, it's also still part of Eretz Yisrael, and we're supposed to have control of it. So Medin Kibush, we're supposed to.
Okay, but Kibush is different. Kibush, you have to actually have a call to peace. It says even in of Milchemes Mitzvah of Kibush Haaretz, what is the first din? Like the Rambam says.
Yeah, well, we've been doing calls for peace for that.
But actual call for peace. An actual call for peace is halakhically defined. Okay, what peace is. My point is, you cannot preemptively kill them if you didn't actually do the halachic call for peace, right? Surround them and then say, "Here's the deal," right? So we didn't actually do that. My point is that I think that considering what happened a few months ago now, we would all agree that preemption. I think there are actually some people who are crazy enough or deluded enough to believe that preemption would not have been the right thing, halachically speaking, or ethically speaking. You can understand that there are people like that. I can't understand why they would say such a thing.
Is there a difference between what is halachic and what is ethic?
I don't really draw that. Ethics aren't formed by halacha. To claim that something's ethical, by the way, even though it doesn't fit halacha, is really weak. There too many people just say, like, my gut tells me it's unethical. Like the halacha allows such a thing, but we want to do what's right. It's basically what we said 2 weeks ago. The reformers tend to say, they say the halacha or the biblical law says this and that, but really a refined ethic says X, Y, and Z. And by the way, who are the first people to do such a thing within Judaism or claim to do it within Judaism? Say the letter of the law says this and that, but that's not the right way. That's cruel or whatever. And really, the law should be no. Shaul didn't say such a thing. Yeah, whatever. Shaul basically did the right thing. He intended to kill Agag anyways. He just didn't kill him in battle. Okay? And he was given a one-time order. He didn't say that the halacha says, but I know better than the halacha. He didn't save any of the women and children. No. His soldiers kept animals ostensibly to offer them a sacrifice, which is exactly what King David did later. Okay? So we've already had, we'll catch up later. It seems from the pasuk that everybody considered what Shaul did to have been a-okay, if not for the Navi coming and said that by God's standards, it wasn't good enough. Okay, he did exactly what the halacha requires. Just he had been given a horashah to go even beyond. Okay, much farther beyond that. At that one point, he didn't, but later there wasn't such a standard. Before there wasn't a standard, and afterwards. I'm saying the Christians did this. This is something that was a hallmark of Christianity, especially with its regards to its relationship to Judaism. They always said that there's halachas, but those are unfair. They're not progressive enough. What's the good example? With the Rabbi Gamliel, the second example. Remember this? The Ma'aseh Shahaya, Rabbi Gamliel and his sister, who was called Ima Shalom, which which just means like it's like Safta Shalom in modern Hebrew. So Ima Shalom and Safta Shalom wanted to show that this magistrate, who was apparently supposed to be Jewish, but he was appointed and he was a Christian, one of the early Christians. This is the early first century. And he said, he had a psak, right, that really, according to the law, with regards to inheritance, if there's even just one son, he gets all the inheritance over his sisters, right? And girls only inherit when no brothers, right? That's the halacha. That's what you find in the Talmud. And the Christians said, that's unfair. Men and women should inherit from their father equally. So you have a brother and sister, Rabbi Gamliel and his sister, so the inheritance should be divided equally. And they showed that this magistrate actually decided the psak. Sometimes he was straight halacha, and sometimes he was more Christian and, I guess, more loving, like a good Christian, because those Jews with their biblical law and eye for an eye and all the things, they're cruel and mean and unfair. So it depended who gave him a bigger bribe. So they bribed with a candlestick one day, and they bribed him with the donkey the other day. So challenge, hey, didn't you paskin this yesterday? He's like, yeah. Rabbi Gamliel's sister said the donkey came and knocked over the candlestick. As the donkey bribe, of today was better than the candlestick bribe of yesterday. To understand, this was an idea that the Christians had. They say that the Jewish way of looking at these things is too cruel. So that's unfortunately what happens now. We hear that there's a halacha that says X, Y, and Z, and then people who are too informed, too educated, too Western, too Christian, whatever it may be, say that Jewish halacha, the classic one, needs to be updated or is out of date or too cruel or something like that, right? And we shouldn't listen to it. That's my problem. Sometimes people say, well, ethics are one thing. You have to be ethical. And that's why you have these ethicists, atheist ethicists. I wonder if there's a relation. No, there isn't. Who they don't believe in God, and they're highly informed in this extreme Western liberalism that's actually already fallen off the edge of the earth, right? Whereas my father would say they're so open-minded, their brain fell out, that now what's ethics to them? Whatever they think is ethical. My father used to show me a good laugh. The Sunday New York Times, by the way, even 30 years ago, you shouldn't have been reading the New York Times. Okay. And by the way, how much does it cost to get a Sunday New York Times now? Is it $20 or something like that?
I'll read the news.
Okay. I don't know. Does anybody even read print news? I bet you the New York Times only survived because there's some billionaire out there who's just supporting them. What?
Well, the only person I ever met that reads the newspaper is your daughter.
Well, that's not the New York Times. That's the Settler newspaper. That's the Besheva.
Still, it's
But there are a lot of people here read newspapers. They have free newspapers here. The people gobble them up. I haven't really read a newspaper since making Aliyah. Okay. Do you know anything about the New York Times? No, you didn't grow up with it. Okay. Well, they have the Guardian. That's even worse. That's probably worse. Yeah. Okay. So the New York Times. You know about the New York Times? Oh, you're spared. When I grew up, okay, everybody was reading the New York Times. You know why? Either the New York Times is your Chumash, and that's how you informs. Like I said before, there's some Jews I know, they don't understand that their opinions are actually informed by New York Times and CNN. They're lockstep with whatever they're told, and they don't realize that they're not being Jewish. Like they're like what? We'll have to bench soon. Well, and we'll have to go figure that out in a minute. So we'll take a break with the Zoom thing. Okay. So we have to. They're too informed that they don't realize they're mishumadim. But everybody was reading the New York Times, and the people in the middle and the people on the right. Let's say my Rabbi Bronspiegel, he read the New York Times every day. Also, you know why? Just to know, he went to the library to read the New York Times. You just see, just to know, you have to read it with the right colored glasses, like Rabbi Soloveitchik taught. You have to know where their bias comes in. You have to know how to read the truth in between the lines. Or as he famously quipped, he used to tell us, you have to make sure to vote. You can't miss an election day in America. It's not as frequent as it is here in Israel, but it has a certain regularity. You have to make sure to vote. And who did Rabbi Bronspiegel tell you to vote for? He says the New York Times is great. They have a list on the editorial page, in the op-ed page, of their endorsements throughout New York City and the state and federally, who to vote for in each election, who their endorsements are. So take that with you into the voting booth and vote against everybody the New York Times has endorsed. Okay, that's where Machon Shilo told us to. Why would the New York Times do that? Because they do that. They're political, and they care for certain politicians, not others. Okay, so everybody grew up reading this thing. It was a normal thing, right? So they used to have the ethicist, a column by some guy, a professor something of ethics, okay? And you would read it, it was like a joke. Like this guy is asked ethical questions. You send them your shilas to him, and the Sunday column in the magazine, he would actually give an ethical answer to something. And if you're informed by it, any mashgiach in a yeshiva could read this and say this is terrible. Right? It's just god awful stuff. So I think that just the use of the word ethics as a system, as a discipline, as a philosophy unto itself is actually a form of theory. It's basically saying, our own religion. What if you define ethics as proper modes of behavior that are derived from halacha, then you're okay. In which case, it's just a result of halacha. And by the way, it doesn't mean that halacha will always come to the same conclusion. That's why we have a Sanhedrin. That's why we are supposed to come to conclusions by deliberation and also with consultation. You can't just have one man decide. Sometimes you do. When are you supposed to have one man make a decision on these? Yeah, a navi. If you're not a navi, you're a chacham. You could be the biggest chacham. You should still have 70 others or 22 others or 2 others to help you come to a conclusion. You need a beis din to decide these types of things. But ethics as its own thing, as a secular discipline, as a Western discipline, is treif as anything.
This ethicist just sounds like a modern Navi Shekin.
Well, it's not a Navi Shek. He doesn't claim to be a Navi.
It doesn't claim to be a Navi, but he serves the same purpose.
He serves the same purpose as to mislead people and to do the wrong thing. So he's a masis. There used to be, that it's almost interchangeable. In books of Nevi'im, it talks about the Baal. The Nevi'im of the Baal and the Kohanei Baal, right? So what was the line between them? Usually it's the same thing. The Kohanim and the Nevi'im of the idol usually have a lot of overlap. Maybe there was a distinction, but there's usually a lot of overlap, right? Yeah, so there you go. So the high priests of these false religions usually also tend to be their prophets in a manner of speaking. And that's functionally that's what they do. So just to restate the question, would we have been in favor of someone preempting the army, or maybe an individual, a hero, preempting what ended up being the worst day in our history in recent memory?
What would an individual be able to do?
What would an individual be able to do? Let's say he saw the bad guys training, like the whole group of them. You know this better than me. He has a machine gun. He has a tank. He could just start opening fire on them from behind and just killing as many of them as he can. Right? Would that have been the right thing? Was that something he could have done? Is that something impossible? That's what they do in the movies. I don't know. I've never used an assault rifle. You can't just start shooting a lot of people and hoping that they'll all fall.
But I don't know how much that would have helped.
It wouldn't help. Okay, one person couldn't.
After the events already started, there was
individuals had to get into there because they said that groups weren't doing.
Individuals. There was I think it was my machat, which is a mifaked chativa, which is like really high rank.
Yeah.
He just went with like a tank and a bulldozer and just started just defending the Yishuvim by himself with like one other guy.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about that's defending already when it started. What if you had 10 guys with 5 tanks shooting at them?
10 guys with 5 tanks would have been something.
Good. So
one tank, but
yeah,
pulling
whatever
the
you
tank
can
up to the border and then starting to shoot is a little bit harder than it sounds.
Okay, I don't know. I'm just wondering, is this something that could have been done? My point is, if someone had succeeded in preempting this thing, would we have been sitting around on October 10th saying, "Oh man, this person he should have done that. He was a cold-blooded killer," or we have celebrated such a thing?
Depends on who you are.
Yeah.
There would have been people who would have said, "Oh, they're evil. They killed innocent people that didn't do anything."
Or they're planning. Yeah.
I mean, there would be people who would, be celebrating and making kiddushes.
Now, I bring this up now because there is a machlokes. Someone said maybe I should apologize for this. Someone said, uncovered old video of me saying that, there was someone who apparently did something in preemption. So I said that because the way I understand it from my Rebbeim, and it was from evidence I had seen and heard, and that was recorded for posterity, this individual who was basically demonized, considered a murderer, Right? Someone like this, just a wanton murderer of non-Jews, was not glorified in any Jewish group as being a murderer, and they're not praising him for being a wanton murderer. Just like, yeah, got the bad guys, good for him. More like someone who saved people's lives because he preempted an attack that everybody knew was coming, and that's something important. And I didn't say this at the time, and I point this out to someone that Rav Tzuriel, no less, contributed to the book written in his memory of this hero, and Rav Tzuriel described this fellow in glowing terms. Just to know, he wasn't alone in this, by the way. Rav Tzuriel is it's a shame, did you get to meet him? He wasn't your typical hot-headed, violent youngster. Okay, he was a very deliberate and thought-out man, and a very wise person, like the Chachamim that we have nowadays, a true Gadol B'Yisrael, and he didn't come to any of his conclusions lightly without knowing all the facts. Okay, so that's what he did. So that's why I think it's important to stress that this is a Jewish thing. This is something that we believe in, and it's important to save Jewish lives.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.